Morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Bob and Frank. And we have a special treat, especially for all the coaches out there. If
Yep.
you are a hockey coach, are you focusing on developing your communication skills? Grego, what have you been doing lately to develop your communication skills?
I can tell you one thing for sure is since this special guest who's about to come on, seeing her presentation, as Tom Kostopoulos said at the end of that seminar, she's been in my head, and I can't stop trying to get the ums and ahs out of my daily speech.
For sure. I think any coach consistently reflects on the way they deliver their message, but this presentation at the Brock seminar definitely caught our attention. I thought it was a big buzz in the building, and very pleased to have her on the podcast. Welcome to the Bob and Frank show, Jenny Rearick.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jenny. Thanks so much for taking the time. Like I said, all the people we were sitting down at lunch at the Brock seminar, your presentation definitely caught a lot of people's attention. And if you were a coach, how are you not seeking out a professional to help with your communication skills? Because I don't think it's possible to be a good coach if you can't communicate well. How did you come about with your company Fit to Speak, and how did you get started with that?
Welcome. Well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here and glad to hear that there was positive feedback about the presentation at Brock. I have been doing communication skills training since 2017. Oddly enough, I kind of fell into it. I've always had a corporate position, but I've taught strength and conditioning on the side because I was a collegiate volleyball athlete, and I wanted to stay involved. And a person in one of my adult sessions, they owned a communication skills training business, and they liked the way that I coached in the gym. And they asked if at any point I'd be interested in possibly coaching in a corporate setting.
Mm.
I took one of their workshops and I loved it. I was blown away that I had been in my corporate career for 10 plus years and had not ever been taught how to public speak, how to present, how to manage my interactions with others. And I decided that that would be a really interesting way to move my career. I took a position with them, and for 5 years, full time, I traveled all around the country and taught business communication skills workshops, and also worked one-on-one, mostly with people in the corporate setting. During COVID, we were at home, and as someone who's been in the fitness and sports space, I always felt an itch to work with coaches or strength and conditioning coaches, sport coaches. And I thought, there's nothing really in that space where they're being taught communication skills or presentation skills or public speaking. And if they do want to do it, they have to engage with a corporate company who teaches corporate professionals. And as you both know, those two environments are pretty different.
Yeah.
They're almost way too formal for coaches, and all of the examples that they use to teach the skills are corporate related and not necessarily the scenarios that coaches or trainers find themselves in. So I saw a little bit of an opportunity for myself because I relate very well to that audience. And I started posting on Twitter, just little things that I knew and that other folks I was coaching were finding helpful. And I started getting a lot of traction. And as fast forward, I decided to do my own little side gig, which is where Fit to Speak came in. And then over the course of the past 5 years, it's really developed into something pretty big, which has been a lot of fun.
That's amazing. What a story to start up Fit to Speak. When you were working in the corporate side, were you usually sitting in firsthand, kind of watching someone communicate and then giving them feedback, or was it mostly recordings and then you'd kind of have a meeting afterwards to go over and review?
Mostly the second one. The majority of the work I was doing was actually companies or individuals hiring me to come in and lead organized workshops. with specific developing specific communication or speaking or presentation skills. And then when I work with one person, if they have recordings of themselves speaking, often that's the best way to start a coaching relationship with somebody.
Okay.
And as you know, unless you're willing to travel around to sit in on somebody communicating, it's really difficult to actually get a front row seat.
Yep.
To be able to give somebody feedback. You really have to be present for a full day to follow someone around almost and watch how they communicate to get a real sense of how they do it.
Yeah.
Cool. And that's impractical.
Yeah, for sure. Where I was going with that is I was just kind of wondering if you've worked with some corporate bosses or anyone in the corporate world who kind of carries themselves more like a sports coach and kind of has that type of enthusiasm or volume, if you will, to deliver their message.
Yeah, any executive level person that I've worked with, they're some of my favorites because they've already reached the pinnacle of their career and now they're just looking for an extra edge. So a lot of them are really coachable.
Nice.
And it's not even that they're looking for one super specific nugget of change they can make that will have almost a snowball impact on what they do. And that is a lot of fun, is to work with those folks who have high pressure communication scenarios and they're already doing pretty well. They're just looking for an extra edge.
Nice. That does sound like fun to be able to kind of find that thing for them and watch it make a huge impact. Cool. So, where Grego and I are from in Greater Toronto area, I'd say everywhere in Ontario, hockey coaches, skill coaches really are a dime a dozen. If there's one rink across the street from me that has 6 different rinks inside of it, there's easily 10 plus different skill coaches that work out of there. In terms of communication skill coaches, I don't know where to find one. In your area, near San Francisco or the Bay Area, how common are communication skill coaches, and where do you see them trending?
There are a lot of them in the corporate space. If you were to search business communication skills training, you would find a lot. But as we talked about before we got on here, those types of trainings are designed to help professionals in a corporate setting. And a lot of the material and the context that they teach through is not immediately relevant to folks in sports or fitness or skill, which is, again, where my Fit to Speak stuff comes in, because I take the universal set of communication principles that they teach in corporate settings, but I teach it through the lens of scenarios and the context that coaches find themselves in, which is different than a corporate professional. So if you were to go on Google and search for communications coach, you'd probably find somebody, maybe not local to you, but certainly remote. But in terms of our space or this industry, there's not many. The other woman that I know about that's awesome as well, her name's Betsy Butterick. She goes by the Coach's Coach. She also teaches coaches how to communicate, and even more so in regard to how to relate to their players. She's wonderful in the space.
Nice. Yeah, no, I can't help but think that it's going to become very common. Like, I think it's only a matter of time until professional sport organizations are having somebody like you or a communication skills coach on hand to help with the staff, and I think even just as important, to help with the players. Since 2017 till now, I know you've done a lot of one-on-one coaching with different coaches. Is that something you kind of see as well with sport organizations hiring someone like that full time?
I hope so. In my mind, I'm biased, but I always say that communication is the tool you use to do your job. If we're thinking about our objectives as a coach, I'm trying to get my message heard and understood and acted on as efficiently as possible. Yeah. And the way you do that is by understanding some foundational principles of communication and also continually evaluating how you go about organizing and delivering messages and the impact that they're having. It is really difficult to do that on your own because we have been communicating the way we've been communicating for our entire lives. To have some outside perspective, to simply poke holes or ask questions about your intentions and how you're organizing information and then delivering that information can bring up a lot of areas for development that are flying under the radar. So yeah, I'm with you. I in my mind, I don't see any downside to an organization bringing on someone who's going to evaluate the way communication flows through the people within that organization as a way to create efficiencies and to limit miscommunications.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw an Instagram reel, and I can't recall who was speaking, but he was talking about how, like, any good coach, whether it's a big win or a loss, like the way they communicate after and the message they deliver, like everyone reflects on what they just said and how they're going to do better the next time. But it's not easy when you just have the perspective of yourself. And, you know, I don't think there's a lot of coaching staffs, in particular in hockey, that are going to sit down and be like, hey, how'd you think we talked with the kids after?
No, that's the missing piece. That's it's actually really common. It's very common right now that what are we going to say? And like the comment of relate to players. We need to learn how to relate to players. And it's all this. So you're getting advice from other people saying, if you're going to be a good coach, you need to know how to relate to players. But it stops there. There's no like how.
Right. Exactly. What does that mean?
Yeah. That's something that you said in your presentation. Right. And I really felt that comment that you're told to be a coach, a player's coach. You're told to connect. All these things, but there's no how.
There's nothing tangible.
Yes. Nothing tangible.
And the example I always use is if you were to go and do something with public speaking, when you get feedback from people, it's all surface level. You seemed a little nervous. You really want to project your confidence. Those are great, but the question is, how do I do that? What do I tactically need to do in order to be perceived in that way by other people? And that's the gap that I fill.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's 100% a gap there, and I think it's only a matter of time. I wish I could, have a professional work with me on that. I'm coaching at the minor hockey level, so to have something like that full time is obviously unrealistic. But your presentation definitely brought that thought into mind. Same with players though, and I think it's a common spiel that fundamentals and skill development, once you get to the higher levels, like everyone's on the same level, so to speak. There's obviously some small discrepancies here and there, but sometimes we talk about little things that make a big difference. Being able to communicate, whether it's being a glue guy or being high energy amongst your peers, or just being able to communicate effectively with a coach, it really helps you get a role on a team. Are there any youth programs for Fit to Speak, or have you ever worked with athletes on communicating, like kind of in that regard, to help them communicate with coaches?
Right now, I don't have anything specific. There's certainly a need for it. From my perspective, that need comes in the form of teaching athletes how to advocate for themselves in a structure where there's an authority figure, which is often the coach. Regardless of how the coach sets themselves up in the dynamic of a team, there's always a hierarchy, a power dynamic that's there that prevents a lot of athletes from advocating for themselves. And I don't necessarily mean that from an adversarial standpoint, but even you think about all the moments where an athlete where they're not understanding what a coach is trying to say. An athlete needs to have the skill to be able to, number one, recognize that misunderstanding is happening. But then number two is to advocate for themselves in terms of being able to raise their hand in a way and explain that understanding is not happening and advocate that they need another way to learn. The amount of miscommunication that happens, or communication that happens, and the athletes will say that they understand, a lot of that happens because of the power dynamic, but then we don't find out for several practices or even until the next game that there wasn't understanding there. You think about how much time was wasted because either the coach doesn't have the skills or the will to check for understanding, or the athlete doesn't know how to advocate for themselves when it comes to relating to the coach in a way that doesn't feel like they're being disrespectful.
Yeah.
I heard some advice that's pretty common recently as well. At the junior level, you have a coach's room. When you speak to a player, don't call them into your office, change the setting. That seems like good practical advice. But again, it's still not talking about how you act. It doesn't change how you communicate. You're just changing the setting. Another comment you made in the presentation at Brock was you asked everyone if they felt like they were a good communicator, which I thought something like that. I thought that was an interesting question because at times, yes. In different settings, no. I was saying to Spencer, when Spencer and I get in front of a group of 10, 20, 30 kids, players on the ice, we've been complimented many times that we just have a great skill of communication. But then watching you present in front of the audience, I was saying to Spencer, I'd have a heart attack. So situationally,
100%.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could raise my hand. Am I a good communicator? I've been told that in a certain setting. But then Spencer has, for example, told me experiences of dreading the coaching parents meeting before the season or whatever. There's different settings where all of a sudden communication is not our strength.
Yeah, and my experience with that, because I can relate to that as well. There are going to be certain audiences that you feel more comfortable with than others, of course. And when I hear you describe that, immediately what I'm thinking is it's pretty obvious in the scenario when you're in front of a group of athletes that you have something they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
There's you're perceiving yourself to be in the role of a teacher in a way. That creates a lot of comfort and it creates a service mindset for communication because you're giving. Whereas when we get in front of an adult or a peer level audience, all of a sudden now it's a little cloudy. We begin to doubt if our knowledge is enough more that we're going to be able to serve these people in a way with what we're giving them. And there's some self-doubt can creep in there. Something I often tell the clients I work with is the more you can get into a service or an others focused mindset when you're in front of and speaking to people and remembering that you're communicating in service of those people and reminding yourself what it is you're giving them that they don't currently have, that can help tame those feelings of self-doubt or even imposter syndrome. Versus when we get in front of a peer level audience, our instincts often put pressure on us to perform. And when we have a performance-based mindset, we tend to want to be perfect speakers or get everything right. And that it just changes the dynamic where it's no longer this like dialogue based interaction. It's more performative, and that just doesn't feel genuine to us. And it often isn't really enjoyable for the people listening to us.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
No, it really is, for sure.
So as I mentioned, like I feel like any coach, communicating is their ultimate tool, or that as you've been saying. What does a communication skill session look like for a coach?
It depends on them. Yeah. I had mentioned to you both when I first started doing this, almost everyone who comes to me, their first prompt or the way they initiate is, I want to be a better communicator. Well, you think about how broad that term is. That could mean 100 different things. What I've done over the course of several years is now I work with someone, usually over the phone, even 1, 2, sometimes 3 times, to define a specific objective for them before we ever schedule time to work on something. Let me give you an example of things that I've worked with coaches on. I've worked with coaches on preparing for an interaction that they're going to have with a parent to talk about some type of scenario that happened that was not pleasant, or where someone needs to take ownership of some behavior that's uncomfortable. So a crucial conversation. I've worked with coaches to prepare and practice for presentations that they're going to be giving, for meetings that they're leading at the start of a season, either with parents or with their athletic department. I've worked with interdisciplinary coaches who are having trouble interacting with other coaches on their team. Because of maybe a power dynamic there that's not working. And so the other coach is dismissing their ideas all the time, or being disrespectful to their process. So how they go about navigating that communication scenario. I've worked with coaches to prepare for podcasts that they're going to be on, or even just working on their ability to organize, almost creating templates or frameworks for themselves that they can use during times when they're presenting or talking to their team in the middle of a game or after the game, so that there's more of an organized and structured message that they can build each of those times. So there's a number of things. It depends on what the coach wants or what they need.
Well, that's great.
I love that. I know that you mentioned that there's kind of like universal concepts to communication, but it's not like if somebody calls you up, they're just going to go through the ABCs of it. It's everything's personal, and whatever they're preparing for, that's what you're going to cater to. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and as you can imagine, even as coaches yourselves, sitting in a room and teaching a player how to do something is not as effective as getting them on the ice and doing it. That's something that's true for me as well. As we can hypothesize or use fictitious scenarios to work through to learn communication principles, but it doesn't mean a whole lot, and it's unlikely that you're going to apply that in real life unless we can actually reflect on a scenario that's already happened. And what's nice about that is there's a lot of psychological safety there. Let's say you had an unpleasant interaction with a parent. If you then come to me, we can use that as learning material, because now that interaction is already done, there's nothing really you can go back and redo about it. But we can now use that as material to talk about, if you were to do this over, what could that look like? And then when another scenario presents itself that's similar, now you've in a way used old material to practice, and we can apply it in the future.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I got one more question. Grego, I don't know if you have any more there. But in terms of, coaches, I'm sure they reflect on themselves after they run a practice, after they give a message after a game. Is there anything coaches can do for their own professional development and their own communication skills, just on a consistent basis, to develop their communication skills with intention?
Two things. Number one is anytime you have an opportunity to record yourself speaking, and that doesn't always need to be video. Sometimes, even if you're able to record a phone call that you're leading and then listen back or watch back. The key, though, is what you're evaluating yourself on when you're listening or watching it back, because a lot of us don't like to hear our own voice. We don't like to see ourselves on video. And that can get in the way of us actually objectively understanding our effectiveness. So what they can do is pretty simply, it's before you even listen or watch back, asking yourself, what outcome was I trying to create? And then picking a couple of objective measures. If I know that the practical aspects of communication, really there's three big buckets. It's how you use your voice, how you use your body language, and then the third is how did you structure your information? So if I know that those are my three buckets, I might just say, while I listen or watch this back, I'm going to take 3 notes of objective things I noticed about my voice, maybe my volume. Did I pause? If I had to rate my pace as slow, medium, or fast, how would I rate my pace? Those are examples of objectively evaluating your voice. Body language. Let's say I have a video of myself just answering the question, what specifically did I do with my hands? Ain't no judgment, just what did I do with them? Were they in my pockets the whole time? Were they together behind my back? Did I have them up and they were moving around? My eye contact. What did my eyes do while I spoke? What about my feet? Did I stand in one place? Did I move around a lot? Again, nothing is good or bad. It's just, was I aware that I was doing that? And how do I think that impacted my effectiveness?
Yeah.
And then the third is message organization. Meaning, if I had to listen to what I said and then maybe make a very high level outline on how I structured that information, do I think that was the best way to organize the information? I'm not writing the details down of what I said, but to give you an example, a lot of coaches, when they speak, they're long-winded, and because they follow this process of starting with an explanation as a way to then land on their point. And the reason why we do that is because that's how we in our head came to our point. We went through this logical building process, and then we said, that took me to my conclusion. But when we deliver information to other people, we need to flip-flop that. We need to give people our point or our conclusion first so that they have the context. And then we say, okay, let me explain how I got there. And then it follows by the explanation. As an example of what I mean by structuring information. Did I do that? Did I start with an explanation? When did my point come in? What supporting points did I use? Okay, the second thing, because that was recording yourself, that was number one. The second thing is I'm a proponent of having coaches go out either on YouTube, or maybe this is in person. They have an access to a network of other coaches, and identify a handful of other coaches that you feel drawn to because of the way they communicate. Something I've learned is that all of us perceive people in different ways in terms of how they communicate. My hypothesis is that the people that you feel drawn to in terms of how they communicate, you're drawn to them because you believe that there's aspects about the way they communicate that you could maybe do too.
Yeah.
So it's almost like something in their personality kind of aligns with something in your personality that's maybe dormant right now. And you think, I'm really drawn to them. That to me is a big sign. Listen to your intuition. Is like, what do they do? That like there's something in me that kind of wants to do that too, and that maybe I think is possible, which is why I'm drawn to them.
Yeah.
Once you get that handful of people that you feel drawn to, start to pick apart some of the objective or specific things they do with their voice, with their body language, with the way they organize their content that draws you in, and then try on, like you're going to try and close. Try on some of those things for yourself and see if any of them stick.
Cool.
We've definitely done that, Spencer, subconsciously with
100%.
With Yari and Ray and whoever else.
Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And you know what? Right before you, or I'm not sure if it was when you jumped on the call here, but Greg was talking about the Landon Donovan clip.
Yeah.
For me personally, and I think I can speak for Greg as well, that wasn't for me. That's not how I would want to communicate. But there were other people in the room that were like, "No, it's great." It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And I'm on your side generally with that clip, and I do find it almost in those moments I have to remind myself that there's no one right way to communicate. At the end of the day, for coaches, the most important thing is, did you know what your objective was? Did you know the impact you were trying to create? And then help me understand how all the ways you chose to communicate that was getting you to that impact. And if you can't explain your why, then to me, it just says that you're speaking out of your habits, and maybe there's some room for improvement there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big time. Cool.
Yeah, my last question, which is what we ask everybody who is on our show, is any quick, practical tip or two for players, young players, hockey players, or parents or coaches or all three,
Okay.
for how to communicate more effectively? Something tangible that they can just, oh, there you go. Good. Something.
Okay. Let's start with players.
Okay.
Okay. The thing that sticks out to me most is if you're not understanding something, raise your hand and take responsibility for it, because it's likely that if you're not following or tracking with something the coach is saying, there's probably a few other athletes in the group that are not as well. That can be scary. So if I were to give you an example script of how that could sound, it could be as simple as saying, I'm not following. Could you explain that another way?
Mm-hmm.
It could be that simple. It's not disrespectful. And most of the coaches I know would greatly appreciate an athlete saying that.
Yes.
And what's even better is that you can really, if you have an athlete that has the courage to do that, you can begin to build a culture where creating understanding is a priority amongst the group. And that could be really important for the long-term success and function of the team.
Yeah, I think all I want from my players is for them to demonstrate that they understand, whether that's with their body language or communicating it, as long as they say, okay, I got it, or whatever it is, nodding along type of thing. If they show understanding, that's good in my book.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm guilty of the opposite. With an older player specifically, I'll explain a drill and then they say, okay, so you go like this and then like this. I'm like, just go. You'll
Yeah.
right.
You're making a point I wanted to give some nuance to, is that something I've learned as someone who teaches and coaches others is there are some folks who will ask questions as a way to delay trying something because there's some hesitation. And that's where the art of coaching comes in, is to know, is this a player who's truly not understanding, or a player who's avoiding because either they know that they're not going to be very good at this, or they're going to struggle in front of the group and they're just avoiding it to avoid it. And in that case, like you're saying, it's just, hey, I want you to do this first and just try it on. And then I think we'll have a more productive conversation about your questions once you have the context of trying it.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tend to, part of it is because it's drilled in Spencer and I and many coaches to not slow the session down. Like, let's get going. But also I think, like, go screw it up and I'll tell you what's wrong. Right.
Both apply in different scenarios. For coaches, I'll make it more practical to body language and voice. Let's talk about body language first. One of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of coaches is their use of eye contact. Mm-hmm. Eye contact is how we physically connect with somebody before anything else happens. It's also a way to not only demonstrate our presence to somebody, but also a way to connect with someone enough to know how present they are with us as a listener. I coach often people to make, if they're one-on-one with somebody, 70% of the time of that one-on-one interaction, you should be looking at the other person in the eyes. And then when you're speaking to groups, something that most people do is this thing called scanning, where their eyes, almost like a sprinkler head, their eyes just go back and forth, but they're never actually engaging with anybody in the group. And as a reminder, even if you're speaking to 50 people, you're never actually speaking to 50 people at once. You're speaking to one individual and there's just 50 of them. You want to always engage at the individual level, because if you want a group of people to be engaged with you, the only way to do that is to get each of the individuals in that group to feel engaged. And we do that firstly with our eye contact. And then the second thing with the voice, which is something we talked about at the conference, is creating more space between the individual points that you're making. A lot of us speak in a run-on sentence, and we connect those run-on sentences with filler words, which are sometimes a natural part of our speech. Mm-hmm. I encourage coaches that is when you're speaking, listen for when you're nearing the end of the point you're trying to make. And when you get there, just stop. Like you've come to a stop sign and take a breath and then start with your next point.
Love that. Whenever I do a pre-scout, I usually try to stick to 3 things and, cater to the attention span of young kids. But with your presentation, reflecting on that and the pausing and you just reiterating it there, it's always good to this kind of take an extra breath, let the point sink in, and then bluff with another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parents is challenging. I don't know what I'd say for parents.
Yeah. I maybe like I don't know if it's speaking skills. It's almost touching on what are they saying to them in the car ride home or whatever, right?
Oh, interesting.
Kind of goes beyond. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a parent. I have a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old. This would be me more speaking from my personal philosophy of communication is there I believe that an athlete's experience of themselves is far more important than your experience of the athlete. And so often I find myself, my stepdaughter just started playing basketball this year. When we're together after her games, my entire conversation with her is basically me asking her questions to almost help with her reflective process of how she perceives herself and how she perceives the decisions that she made on the court, and then letting her take a guess as to the impact that they had and maybe not leading her into answers because of my own perceptions. So it's like, what kind of teammate do you think you were today? Like, I thought I was a good teammate. Can you think of it? Like, when on the court do you think you were a good teammate? Like, give me an example of a time, during the game that you were a good teammate. That's almost the way my conversations with her work, is helping her learn how to reflect herself on her own game versus me imposing my reflection or perception of her game on her.
Awesome.
That's a good question to ask your kid after a game.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
But getting them to connect the dots. It's like, yeah, I was a good teammate. Well, talk to me about when. Like, can you remember any parts of the game specifically where you felt like you were a good teammate?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I wish we told you beforehand to tell all parents to never coach from the stands.
Yeah, right. I don't think
my dad had some different questions when I was driving.
Mine too.
I haven't heard that one. Sorry, my last thought is, how did you end up at the Brock hockey coaches seminar? Yeah,
very randomly. I got connected to TJ on Twitter.
Nice.
And then I have a blog that I write. I wrote consistently for several years until recently. I just recently opened a gym in my town, and so my time is so limited now, but it's still live. It's called it's fittospeak.substack.com, and I have about 100 posts on there. And what I do on there is I go on YouTube and I find videos of coaches speaking, and then I write an entire blog article breaking down their speaking skills to help other coaches basically see what I see so that they can kind of do some of the work on their own without having to hire somebody like me.
Right.
And TJ and I got connected on Twitter, and then he started following my blog, and then we started talking on messages through Twitter. And we've stayed lightly connected over the last couple of years. And then he reached out this year about the conference and thought that it would be a nice addition to the conference. So funny to me still that you can make those types of connections on social media. And then there I was in Canada. So
you didn't tear TJ apart on one of those blog posts, did you?
No. Can you imagine? Actually, I would say maybe except for one article on there, I write on my series that we focus on what they're doing well, because my general philosophy is that you want to mimic what other people do well and not necessarily try to avoid what people don't do well.
Yeah.
Cool. I was just going to ask that. That's well said.
Yeah. And
I think there's one on there where I maybe there was it Deshaun Foster, the UCLA football coach? He had a big media day interview that was not great. I try not. I don't. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't do it disrespectfully, but
Right.
More often than not, I err on the side of pointing out what coaches
Sure.
do well.
As you should, as the world should.
Yes.
Take a tip from that.
Yes.
The reason I brought it up is so interested, like Spencer said, how does this fit in the hockey space? And it'd be cool to hear if that's something you get a lot of attention from the hockey world. But
well, now I am.
Now you are. Yeah. Good.
I was so excited to go to the Brock conference because hockey isn't an area that I've had exposure to yet. I've actually worked with some folks in the MLB, and then I've worked with some pro strength and conditioning coaches, but not specific in hockey. Although I have some personal contacts through strength and conditioning in that realm, I was excited to get some exposure there because everything I do is not sport specific. Certainly there are things I need to learn about that sport to tailor what I do, but generally what I do is applied across the board. It's just there's some nuance.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time until it becomes a big thing, and I don't know what pro sports is going to pick it up first, but it'll trend in that direction.
I hope so. It'll make a big difference.
For
Coach
sure.
development is definitely trending right now. So
yeah, it is. I mean, just the fact that as an example, me getting invited to Brock to do that's a positive step.
And the demand was there. I'm sure you had a lot of people talk to you. I knew quite a lot of people at that conference because I'm from Niagara.
Okay.
Everyone had something to say about your presentation. So it's awesome.
Yeah, it is very cool. It's exciting.
And if anybody watching wants to connect, where can they find you, Jenny?
Yeah, the best place, I have a rudimentary website, but it's fit, and there's some hyphens in there. It's fit-to-speak.com. fit-to-speak.com, and my contact info is right on my website.
Cool.
And folks can just email me. Or my blog also, because you can get in touch with me on my blog. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Is that right?
Yep, that's right. And the blog is fit-to-speak, all one word, .substack.com. So if you're just curious about communication skills in regard to coaching, that's a great place to start because there's a lot of free content there that you could spend months working through before you ever reach out to somebody like me.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch that. It's always nice to watch. And like you said, I'm sure there's a lot of really good positive examples and just kind of watch, learn, and mimic. I feel like that's where I've picked up.
Well, and hiring someone like me can be intimidating, really intimidating, because the way we communicate is very personal to our identity.
That was my favorite comment from your speech. Sorry, I forgot to bring that up. To not tie your identity to that one was very powerful.
Yeah, when people give us feedback about our communication, often it feels like a direct hit to our character, to who we are, which it's not, but it's hard. It's hard not to feel that way. And so often I encourage people to go to my blog and spend a lot of time reading through, because you can learn a lot on your own through that. And then you also get a feel for my style and how I interact with people. And sometimes that gives the courage people need to finally reach out.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. I'm looking forward to continue to reflecting on my communication, and especially with your little handbook, focusing on volume and your pace and your inflection. Really, really good stuff. And thank you so much.
Oh, this was a fun conversation. Thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye now, guys.